Hi, there seems to be a severe lack of video tutorials on YouTube regarding removing and reinstalling wheels on an oil head. So this video is going to be focused more towards the person who just bought a used oil head and would like to do their own maintenance. If you've owned one of these since new, you probably already know how to remove your wheels. So we're going to cover wheel removal, tire change, and installation of the wheels. The photos you've just seen are the bolts that need to be removed. So what we're going to start with on this 1150 RT is removal of the two fender mount bolts that are on the side. We're going to leave the top ones in place. Why, you might ask? The two top ones bolt directly into the fork bridge. They are frequently seized. The last thing you want to do is snap those off. Then there's nothing to hold the fender from drooping down in the front and touching the front tire. So generally you leave those alone. This allows enough flex in the fender to lift the front fender up to roll the front wheel out. So those two are removed. And I'm going to take these out anyway and put copper anti-seize on them, which I'm sure I've done in the past because this is a regular customer's bike. But let us proceed. Again, you need your T45 socket. You are now going to remove two caliper bolts on each side. See, these came out nicely. Plenty of copper anti-seize on them because I've been in here before. Bolt is removed. Again, lift it off the mounting tabs and give it a rock back and forth a little bit just to spread the pads inside the caliper. It's going to push your brake fluid level up when you do that, so not a bad idea to check your brake fluid level first. If you have too much in there, it's going to have no place to go. It's going to be harder to remove the caliper from the disc in some applications. Now, if this were an R1100 RT with a much larger fender, we would have to remove all four bolts and take the front half of the fender completely off. The 1150 RT, such as this one, has a much smaller fender, so we only need to remove those two bolts. Again, rock our caliper back and forth. I'll move the camera to this side to point a couple of things out. First of all, this is your speedometer cable. Don't bend it, don't fuck it up. These cables are like $70 or some foolishness now. This other wire is your anti-lock brake speed sensor. Those sensors are a couple $100. Don't pinch this, don't break it, be careful. I generally do with these, I remove the caliper, just set it aside. Pay attention to where your speedometer drive mounts. You'll see there is a slot in the top of it with two ridges. There is a tab mounted on the fork leg. That tab on the fork leg goes in between, in the valley of those two ridges. If you don't put it in that same position, the drive cable is going to be here or here. you will wear that cable out in no time. Don't want to do that. Our next step, you need a 17mm. We are going to remove the axle nut. This actually is an axle bolt. And we are going to grab a 6mm Allen and loosen the pinch bolts. If they loosen easily, I suggest you remove them completely. If they don't want to move much more than half a turn or 1 turn, leave them the fuck alone. We've had a couple in here that were seized and snapped off. There is nothing more miserable than trying to drill that out while it's attached to the bike, especially when you're drilling a steel bolt from an aluminum leg. Remove the 2 bolts. We're going to coat them in copper anti-seize, and I'm going to put them right back in now. Plenty, you can slobber it all over there. You can't have too much in this application. By doing that, you will save the customer and any future technicians that work on this bike a lot of grief and expense. We are now at the point where we're ready to remove the axle and the front wheel. So let's go back to the other side. You can use a screwdriver. You can use an Allen key. You can use whatever the fuck you want that fits in here. Through the axle, you'll notice the position of the holes. This is where they came from the factory. This is where I always set them when I assemble the bikes. This is where I always put them when I reinstall axles. Does it matter? Probably not. The nice thing with the oil heads is with or without luggage, with the front wheel removed, the bike will sit on the rear tire. If you are removing the rear wheel, you want to take the luggage off because it will be tail heavy. But without the luggage, it sits on the front wheel. So we have that out. You will notice you have one thin spacer that goes on the right side of the motorcycle. This way, through the fork. The other side obviously has our speedometer drive. We roll the front wheel out. And that's all there is to removing that. So our tire is changed. Slide this back into place. You're going to take your axle and just get it started. Go ahead and put the washer on the back after you get the axle slid into place. Leave that sitting right there. You're going to get your speedo drive. Make sure the teeth on the speedometer drive are lined up properly. I'll show you what I mean, just in case you're new to a speedometer cable drive. You have these 2 fingers on here. Those correspond with the 2 fingers here. You don't want them together. They need to be offset. These 2 fingers here are what drives this gear around. So that being said, let's go ahead and fit this in place. And if you have to turn this, you have to turn it. Like for this, where we're going, we would. So we're going to rotate that 90 degrees. I'm going to fit that into place. We're going to stick your hand through the wheel, up slightly, push the axle through. Remember what I said about the valley on that speedometer drive? Fits into the tongue, the little tab that's on the fork leg. So that's in place. We're going to start. This also already has copper anti-seize on it, so I'm not going to add any more right now. We're going to start the bolt on the end of the axle. We're not tightening it yet. I'm going to get my drift, your Allen key, or whatever you were using. Set the holes to a horizontal position. We're going to take our torque wrench and set it to 30 Newton meters. Holding our drift in place, which keeps the axle from rotating. That's all there is. There isn't much. It's not a lot of torque. We're going to drop the torque wrench back to 20 Newton meters, which is the minimum on this one, but also coincides with the torque of the pinch bolts. We're going to torque that pinch bolt to 20 Newton meters, and then do the same on the other side. We can now remove the drift because the axle is secured from rotating. That's those. Now we are going to fit our caliper back over the disc. Make sure you get the pads in the right position. If you're having difficulty getting the caliper over the disc, we really need to check the pads because you may have dislodged one of the pads, and that will end up with a draggy brake or piston to disc contact, which you don't want. And in this case, the fucking camera's in my way. Let's go there. There we go. Right into place without any difficulty. Once the pad was pushed back where it belongs. There are no washers on these bolts. And again, they already have copper anti-seize on them, so there's no reason for me to add any more, at least not this time. We're going to screw these in by hand. One of these days I'll make a lengthy video about using tools for those who are not that familiar. We're going to set this to 25 Newton meters. It's the same torque as the rear bolts, rear caliper bolts. Torqued, torqued. Now move over to the other side. And we're going to insert these two bolts and torque these as well. Obviously, these would require the same torque. .30 and 30. Our next step, we're going to get some of these tools out of the way. Our next step is going to be reinstalling those two fender bolts that we took out. This can be slightly tricky, because sometimes the nut cert that's on the back, it's actually attached to the rear half of the fender, gets out of line. You'll notice on these bolts there's a groove cut in them, and it's filled with plastic. It's kind of like a lock bolt, like a nylock nut. Anyway, get these in. You may find you need to jiggle the rear half of the fender a little bit to get the bolt to line up. Usually once one is lined up and in, the other one will follow suit quite easily. And that's it. That's how you remove and reinstall wheels on an oil head. There are minor variations from model to model, but not really much. So I hope that was helpful, and next we're going to do an oil change on this, and we'll do a quick video on that as well. Thank you. One final thing you absolutely have to do before you test ride this bike or hand it back to the customer. Since you've had the brake calipers off and the pads spread apart, you need to pump the brakes up before you ride it. So on this bike, where it has Evo brakes, servo equipped, you turn the key on, activate the front brakes until you see that you're getting adequate braking action. Same with the rear. Pump the pedal. Make sure that it's working. For a non-servo equipped bike, you would just pump the brakes until you feel it in the lever. It is critical. The last thing you want to do is test ride this with no brakes or send the customer out. You know, it takes several pumps before the pads make contact with the disc again. So pump them up. Be safe. Thank you.